Hello and welcome to the Leathercraft Masterclass tool reviews. So over the next few weeks I'm going to be filming several different tool reviews of the tools that I have in my workshop. So I get asked a lot what kind of tools that I recommend, what kind of tools that I use, how to maintain tools, how to sharpen, etc, etc. So I thought I would start out with some tool reviews, basically going over some of the products that I use and some of the products that I enjoy using. And the first review, I think, is something very close to my heart, which is the awl. The awl is something that I use in my traditional leather work. It's something that I prefer using versus using a pricking iron and piercing all the way through. Sometimes I do that for thinner leather goods, watch straps, card holders, but using the awl or having the skill to use the awl just opens up a lot more opportunities when it comes to things like box stitching, stitching through thick handles, thicker leather goods, bag bases, and that kind of thing. And if you just restrict all usage to when you absolutely have to use it or when you really need it, then oftentimes you don't really have the familiarity with the tool that's necessary. So I like to use it all the time, even if I don't really have to, even if I'm stitching through, say, 1 to 2 millimeters of leather, where you could quite easily get a modern pricking iron through there because the prongs are usually a bit thinner than they used to be with, say, Blanchard or Barnsley or Joseph Dixon pricking irons. Usually they're quite thick, so if you go through 2 to 3 millimeters of leather, you're going to end up with some gaping holes that are going to be difficult to close up after stitching with a hammer. So modern pricking irons are better at going through thicker layers of leather and more leather without opening up the holes too much, but I still like to use an awl so that I am proficient when it comes to times where I absolutely have to use it. So it's, you know, there are arguments for and against using an awl. Some people really don't like it, and I think those people are usually people that don't do anything in leathercraft that really requires awl usage. So if you're going to stitch a bag like this, for example, there are times where you're stitching through very thick leather and you need to use an awl. It just wouldn't be practical to try and do it all with a pricking iron. But there are people out there who just do wallets, who just do watch straps, who just do card holders, and they've never come across a scenario where they've needed it. So to them it's very confusing that people just stand by this, you know, very confusing looking tool, and which tends to make things a bit more complicated for some. But I like to use it, and I have a whole different selection of them. My favorite one is this particular awl. It doesn't have a name. I know the artisan who made it, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But this is an awl from Rocky Mountain Leather Supply in the US. It's made in France, and the construction of this thing is absolutely bomb-proof. It's one of the reasons that I like it. Now, titanium is an odd material to use on an awl, but what they've done is they've made the ferrule, which is this bit here. Now normally, say on a Blanchard awl, you have a ferrule at the top, which is just basically a tube of brass that goes over the end of the wood, so that when you hammer in your blade at the top, it just essentially stops the wood from splitting. The ferrule on this, on the other hand, isn't for that reason. Very simply, it has a set screw, or grub screw as we call it in the UK, here. And it allows the undoing of the grub screw so that you can actually replace the blade with different blades of different lengths. And if you break one, for example, so that you don't have to throw the awl away. You wouldn't want to, it's a very expensive awl. But being as this is solid titanium, and it connects through to the back, which is also solid titanium, it would make the awl quite, well, not unwieldy, but quite heavy to use. So to keep it light, they've used titanium. So it's more of a tactical reason than just because it's kind of cool, I guess. Which it is, because it feels very solid, feels bomb-proof, like you could, you know, pick ice with it, but it's very light at the same time. So you can feel that they've used something a little bit different in this. The construction of the tip is a little bit different to the normal pointed tip. It's becoming very fashionable in leathercraft now to have a rounded tip on the awl, which is what I use, because it centers into the prick marks very easily. So if you go a little high into the prick mark hole or a little bit low, the blade will actually center itself. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see a big difference on the face side, the hide side, where you're looking at when you've finished your stitching your leather goods. The back stitches on the back side, that's where you're going to see the biggest difference in consistency. So if you like decorative angles on both sides, but you also want very consistent stitching on both sides, then a rounded blade awl is a good idea. Now they've gone a different route on this one. This is a chisel tip awl. It does come in slightly, quite abruptly towards the end, but then it has a flat spot on the top. And I'll show you a picture of that now. So this is an interesting way of creating an awl blade. And it has very, very little taper. I think it goes from about 2.1 to about 2.2, and then it abruptly goes up to about 2.8 near the top. So it's not very depth sensitive. So if you push it in 5 or 10 millimeters or 15 millimeters, it's not really going to change the width of the hole that you're making. But if you push it all the way in, for example, you're using much thicker thread and you're using it on a thick piece of leather, then it comes in handy because it opens up the hole a little bit more. The wood on this comes from France, in the region that it was made. I believe it was the east of France, somewhere in the east of France, near Jura, I believe. I could be wrong about that. But it's very, very nice. It feels nice in the hand. It feels very, very solid. And it looks nice too. For those who know me, I'm definitely more about function over form. I need it to do a job and do a job well first. And then if it looks good, so be it. I think the beauty of a tool is not in what it looks like, but how it performs. And if it looks good at the same time, aesthetically, then so be it. The good thing about this awl is you can undo the little set screw. I believe this is a T10 at the top here and a T6 on the base. But if you undo this and take the blade out, there's a flat spot which is ground out. So the inside of the blade that you can't see that's inside the ferrule is completely round. But there's a flat spot. So if you take it out and put it back in, it indexes to the same point every time. And if this little screw does become loose, it means that the blade can't actually come out because it's blocked. It would have to undo quite a bit for it to fall out. The other major benefit is because you have the screw at the back, I can simply undo this and rotate the ferrule. So there's one flat spot on this handle here on the haft, and I can index that against my little finger when I stitch, so that I can have the handle, the haft, in the same position every single time. And when I pick it up off the table, I don't have to look at it. It's not like a Blanchard where you have two flat spots. You just have one. So if it's in the wrong position, you'll know immediately and you can just bring it back to center. But if my blade doesn't match up to the angle of my prick marks, I can undo this, rotate the ferrule. It can be a little stiff at times, but rotate the ferrule. And when you get it back into the hole that you've made with a prick mark and it fits perfectly, the angle is matching, you simply do this up and you're set. And if you change the blade with another one, it will index to the same point every single time. So it's a really handy awl to have. If you're a professional or you do this for a living like I do, then you want to invest in the best tools. If this isn't for everybody, if you're a hobbyist or you're just learning or you're just picking up the craft, this is $100, it's $99 awl. So it's not for everybody. But if you're doing this for a living and you use the awl blade a lot, I think it's good to invest in what's essentially making you money. So yes, by comparison to average awls or cheaper awls or awls from China and Japan, it's very expensive. But at the same time, in my opinion, it's also the best. So for all of these reasons and more, I think the quality of this is absolutely outstanding. The blade steel, I'm not sure what it is, but it rings when you pluck it. So it's hardened very, very well, but it's also flexible, so it's not going to snap on you very easily. And if it does, you'll probably abuse the tool a little bit too much. But yeah, so this is made in France by a gentleman called Jerome David. I actually have his stitching clams, the pince à coudre, or if you're English speaking, pince à coudre. Basically the saddler's clams, the French saddler's clams, and that's what I use when I stitch, and I have his ones. So I will be using those in a minute to demonstrate using this awl. But he also produces tools and equipment for Hermès, Moynat, and a few other French fashion houses. So he is definitely uniquely qualified to make very, very high quality tools, and it shows by the people that use them as well. There's quite a few artisans around the world who also like his tools. And apparently his background is in saddlery, so he definitely understands what people want when it comes to using tools. And I really like the fact that the ferrule on this really tapers down, and that allows for a better feel when your fingers are nice and close to the blade. It gives a more accurate feel to it. It's difficult to explain, but also if you're making something like a thin strap or a watch strap where you want the strap itself nice and close to the clams or the clamp or the stitching pony or whatever you're using, it means that the ferrule isn't going to hit that before you can penetrate fully. So not that you really would go all the way in with it, but it definitely means if your fingers are there, your fingers aren't going to be hitting the stitching clams if that seam is very, very close to the jaws. So enough talking now, let's check it out and see how it stitches. So welcome to my lap. Here we are at the clams, and these are the Jerome David clams that I was talking about. So this is my company, Finch England. Here's some alligator wrapped clams for you. A little bit of a mark on there, so I can't really use it for a product, so perfect for this kind of thing. These have been dyed a different colour, and also I've shellac finished them, so that's a French polish on there, because I'm a little bit of a tart like that. But on the inside of the clams, I've got here a soft, I think it's about 1mm neoprene. It's quite grippy, so it protects any leather goods that I put in there, but also it holds them nice and securely. So for this, I have some leather prepared here. This is some green dyed vegetable tan leather, just lightly burnished the edges, but it's essentially just pure undyed veg tan that I've dyed. And on the surface there, you can see that I've made some prick marks with the pricking iron, but it hasn't gone through to the other side. So we're going to use the awl for its intended purpose, which is just to use these as a guide. So I'm going to place these in the clams, nice and low down into the jaws. And I've got some thread prepared. For this, I'm using some Somac linen thread. I believe this is 18-3 Somac. So I'm going to take my Jerome David awl here, and I'm just going to pierce the first two, like so. I'm just going to do one back stitch on here, center up my thread, go forward one. And these needles actually, first time I'm trying them out, they are by Wooter Leather. They're a little different to John James. They have more of a rounded tip at the front. So essentially I'm using the awl in the traditional way. So I'm actually placing the awl through, taking my left needle here, placing it underneath the awl, lifting up, and as I pull the awl out, the needle slips in. I'm just using these thumb and first finger as just a guide as I go through, and as I lift up to level out, I can essentially take my fingers away and just push through. The pressure is always coming from the back, and that just ensures that you're not forcing the blade to cut anywhere that it doesn't want to. As I go past the end there, I'm just going to bring it a little bit further forward in the clams. So I'm repositioning, and now I can carry on. And this all really feels secure in the hand. It's got a good amount of grip to it, and it centers easily because it's got that one little cutout underneath. It just finds the fingers really easily. It's a scalloped cut, so it's not just sanded flat. in the awl haft is actually scalloped out so your fingers can find it a little bit easier. So this part here, I can really easily find it. So if the awl does move around in my hand, I can easily reposition without too much effort. I didn't actually intend on completing this seam. I just got a random length of thread, but we'll see if we can get there. I think we might be able to do it. What do you reckon? I think this is 3.5, 4mm veg tan. So we might just get it. Just about got it done. Lose the awl temporarily. I'll just backstitch a couple on here. So here we are. So let's just give that a little hammer down because the threads are sitting a little bit proud right now. So there we go. So that's the result from the Jerome David awl here. And this is being sewn with Somac 18-3 linen thread. Not the most consistent in thickness. You're never going to get it as consistent as, say, polyester. But probably fil chinois would just give you a slightly nicer finish. But just as an example, to give you an idea. And on the back there, we have some pretty neat back stitches with a little bit of angle to them, which is quite nice. Again, using better thread would give you better results. But yeah, I like it. It's a really decent awl. And the fact that you can change over the blade and you can change the angle of the blade and it's not pointed, all these things just give you more consistent stitching power. And although it's a very expensive awl by comparison to other awls, this is definitely one of my favorite tools in the workshop. So that's it from me here in the Finch Leather Workshop. If you do have any further questions about the awl or the clams or anything that I've done, please comment below and don't forget to like, subscribe and share.